Hi guys, let's look at some radial symmetry designs. Our objectives are to understand how radial designs in art and culture links us to human experience across cultures, times, and places. And then second, create a personal radial design using radial balance inspired by historical designs in tempera paint demonstrating tints, tones, and shades of each hue of the painter's color wheel. Our words worth knowing is balance. Balance is a principal design that refers to the visual weight of objects, colors, texture, and space in an artwork. So there's three types of balance. There's symmetrical, asymmetrical, and what we're going to focus on, radial. So a way to figure out whether something has radial balance is the pizza test. So when you have a tray of brownies, they're usually a square or a rectangle, and you have them cut like a grid very evenly, this way and this way. Very symmetrical balance. However, if you take anything that is a circular shape, like a pizza, and you cut it simply in a grid, what's going to happen? Chaos. Someone's going to get a piece of all cheese. Someone's going to get a tiny piece of crust. Only a couple people are going to get a nice ratio of crust and cheese. Nobody's going to be happy. So, to figure out whether something has radial balance, you want to find the center point, and from that center point, divide your pizza or your shape evenly. When you do this, if it has radial balance, you'll have identical slices. There's going to be order, symmetry, and everything will be even. So when you're finding something that has radial balance, it comes from the center. So circular shapes, anything that's all the pieces come from the center and are even, organized, radial balance. So radial balance is found all over nature, and one of the cutest examples I've found is the Japanese pufferfish. So on the ocean floor, he builds this 6-foot radial sand sculpture using his fins to attract a mate. And while he's doing this, he's battling against the chaos of the ocean, ruining his sculpture, washing away the sand. So he's in this battle, working 24 hours a day to maintain this structure so he can find a mate. So for him, radial balance isn't just about creating order and evenness. It's about survival, because if he doesn't keep this structure long enough to find a mate, then he will no longer survive. There's countless examples in nature that you can find. Snowflakes have radial balance. Dandelions, plants, shells, our eyes and our iris have radial balance. So using this is a way to create order. So nature and humanity have used circular designs, radial balance, to organize our world. So we're going to be looking at 3 cultures in particular. There are plenty more, but I wanted to focus on these 3. So one is the Aztec sunstone, where they are organizing time in radial balance. Then we're going to be looking at sand mandalas from both Tibetan and Navajo culture, where they're organizing healing. And then rose windows, where they're organizing light. So they're all using radial symmetry to organize complex ideas in their world into a perfect center-based radial design. So the Tibetan and Navajo sand mandalas. So these are 2 different cultures, so we're going to look at each. They're about impermanence and healing. So the purpose for both of these has to do with meditation, healing, and the impermanence of things. So the material in sand mandalas from the Tibetan culture is colored sand. And then once the order is achieved, it's swept away. So the process is more important than the product in both of these. So for the Tibetan mandalas, you can see that they have this little funnel, and it doesn't look like a funnel, but it drops 1 grain of sand at a time, and they have this little rod. And as they do this, it makes a little cricket sound. So it's very meditative as they're building their painting. So it's a very sacred, intricate work of art. It's created by monks, and it's supposed to represent Buddha's palace or the cosmic realm. It's very meditative, like I said, and it's a symbol of life's impermanence, because when they are finished, they sweep it away. So it's supposed to teach non-attachment in their culture. So not being attached to things in this world, even though we spend so much time and we want this thing and we want this thing, but everything eventually will be gone. So not to be attached to worldly things. So the dismantling of the artwork is not just as important, more important than the actual creation. So here's an example of looking at it from above. So very, very beautiful. So they have that nice main center design, and then they'll have even like a square shape, and then they have those beautiful shapes that go around and some details, and they have a beautiful different color border. So even though there are rectangles and things in here, it still has radial balance because it's coming from the center. And here's a close-up. So 1 grain of sand at a time. Do you think you have the patience to do that? I definitely don't. So Navajo sand paintings are similar but a little bit different. The Navajo are a Native American tribe in the southwestern United States, and some of the most important symbols in their culture are found in these sand paintings, which are also called dry paintings. So sand paintings are also part of a very sacred religious ceremony. And unlike other types of art, the viewer in this doesn't stand back. The person who is ill, that needs healing, will sit directly in the center of the sand painting to absorb the healing nature of the symbolism and the sand. However, and here's some examples of their iconography, their symbols. Again, everything's radiating from the center. So this is an example I found. So the girl's sitting in the center. So as the spirit enters the sand, the patient absorbs that power of healing. Then the sand becomes absorbed with the illness, the sickness. So once the ritual is done, they wipe away, just like the Tibetan monks, they wipe away the artwork. And then I have read that now they do make some of these paintings that are permanent to recognize their culture, their symbolism. So they're not just used for this at this point, but they're still a very important part of their culture. So let's shift and look at the sunstone. So we're thinking about impermanence, artwork that's not meant to last, versus something very permanent. So this is a clock or calendar, and it maps the history of their world. So it is carved stone, very grounded. This thing is huge. I've seen it in person. So the center is their sun god. I'm not going to try to say that name. And it anchors the current era. So it was an attempt to track time to prevent the chaos of what they thought was that our current era was going to end in an earthquake. So it is one of the most famous works of Mexican sculpture, discovered in 1790, and they think it was sculpted in the early 1500s. And the sculptural motifs refer to the central components of their astrology. It's not astrology, but I can't say that word. So, and scholars have tried to work to make sense of all the symbolism and the symbols and the little designs in here, but there's still some arguments on what it actually means. But on the face, there's 4 panels. So it's showing 4 previous eras that were destroyed. And then if you're looking at it, you see the center sun god, right? He looks like he's sticking out his tongue. It's not. It's actually, his tongue is supposed to be like a flint, and it's simplifying the need to sacrifice to keep the sun moving. So there's so much really interesting meaning behind all these symbols in here. So here is another example. This picture on the right, I got to go to Mexico City and see this in person, and it was incredible. So this is a Miss Geyser photo. So here are just some images of things I found, some drawings of what the symbols look like. If you go to Wikipedia, you can even see drawings of the characters that are all in this sundial. And here's another photo I took of it far away. It is huge and beautiful. So last are the rose windows. So the purpose of a rose window is to let divine light into the church. So it's stained glass. It's meant to be permanent like the sunstone. And then the radial design pulls your eye into the center, which is the divine source. So they believe that this light passing through these windows would give you the physical presence of God. So here are some more examples. So these are in Gothic churches all over. But they believe the sacred geometry that represented God. So if you had a perfect circle with a perfect division, this proved the church was divine. There's also some similar beliefs in Islamic churches where they believed in sacred geometry. So if you're interested in that, you could also go on a side quest and look up that. So you're always going to see 12 or 24 spokes, and they represent different iconography in the church. So we're trying to connect the Bible to the universe in these. So here are some more examples. And also, as another side note, many people in the Middle Ages couldn't read, so they would use these windows with all their icons and Jesus and Mary to tell the story of the Bible and the prophets, because a lot of people couldn't read, so it was almost like a picture book. All right, so before we start to create our own radial designs, I want you to think about, out of these 3 cultures that we've looked at, or 4 cultures, which culture aligns most with your personality? So are you like the monk? You like the process, but the final product doesn't really matter. You just actually like to make it. Are you like the architect? You want to build something perfect, precise, and permanent that lasts, like the rose windows? Or are you more of a historian? You want to tell a story about the time and where in history you are. So think about which one of these kind of spoke to you the most. So for your turn, you need to make sure you check off your notes with me before you move on. You're going to be creating our own 12-part radial design with a unique center that represents something about you. And you're going to paint each section of your radial design according to the painter's color wheel using your tints, tones, and shades. So move on to the next lesson once you've checked on your notes, and then we'll start practicing, doing a little brainstorming and drawing. Thanks for paying attention. I know it was a long one this time, guys. Good job.